All right, thanks everyone for joining us again at the Project Censored Radio Show. We're very glad to be joined right now by Professor Wolff. Professor Richard D. Wolff is a professor of economics emeritus at the University of Massachusetts Amherst and a visiting professor in the graduate program in international affairs of the New School University in New York City. He is the founder of Democracy at Work and host of their nationally syndicated show, Economic Update. His books include The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself, Understanding Socialism, and Understanding Marxism. That can all be found at www.democracyatwork.info. Dr. Wolff, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Eleanor. Very, very glad to be here.
So Professor Wolff, there's quite a bit of worry at the moment about our lovely economic system faltering and buckling under the weight of its own greed. And as you pointed out many times, that this is by design, and it's actually been a pretty long stretch without a massive recession or depression. But then some smaller banks, small but with big clients like Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank collapsed. But officials keep saying that it's all good. There's nothing to worry about here, folks. Just mismanagement on their part. Nothing bigger at play here. What is your take on this? Are these banks the canaries in the coal mine?
Well, you never know in advance. I'm not going to engage in predicting what's going to happen because that's a fool's effort. Nobody can do that. I can't. And nobody else can. But what that means is those that are assuring us that this is not a problem are wasting our time and their time with that effort. A better way to understand it is to look at the context of what's going on in order to try to gauge a little bit of how serious this is. And if you allow me, let me spend a couple of minutes kind of going through it. The punchline of what I'm about to say is that this is the worst condition that I have ever seen the American economy in my lifetime. And I know that that's true for many of the other people that are economists like me. That is, they've spent their lives trying to understand what the production of goods and services really is all about. I like to mention that my classmate at Yale University, where I got my PhD in economics, most of my classmates were men. Very few women went into that field at that time. And so the few that did, were in my memory because they were the only young women in the classes with us. And one of them, who had the same teachers I did, read the same books and articles, took the same exams, and so really does know the field more or less like I learned it, was a woman named Janet Yellen. And look how far she has come from those days back then. And I'm amazed because we're not friends, so I haven't kept up with her over all those years. But I know what she knows, and she knows pretty well what I know. And so I watch her, and either she's had a series of epiphanies that have changed her mind, or she's reading a script and knows better. And I'm afraid it's likely going to be the latter. And let me explain. We've just put the American working class, the mass of our people, through an absolutely extraordinary period of time. If you take the long view, 30 to 40 years, here are some of the enormous changes. The distribution of wealth and income, radically worse in terms of inequality now than it was 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years ago. We've had a steady widening of the gap between rich and poor. That's already a profound shaker of an economic equilibrium. But now to get even more dramatic, we have had, for the first time in a century of the United States, a serious, real economic competitor. We've not had that for a century. We've been king of the hill, the hegemon, the powerful country, the one to which everyone looks, etc., pretty much for the last century. The effort, which was never all that serious, of Germany and Japan to be contestants a little bit, that was squashed way back in World War II when they were both decimated and defeated. So at least the last 75 years, the United States has been unrivaled. For those of you who remember the Soviet Union, they may have been a military competitor. They may even have been in some way a political competitor, but they never were an economic competitor, never close. And they aren't today. Let me give you a simple statistic, which 99% of my audiences don't know, and that's no accident. The single most widely used measure of the size, the power, the wealth, the import, if you like, of an economic nation is something called GDP, the gross domestic product. And so if you want to compare the relative strengths of two economies, a classic way that economists do that is they look at the GDP of one and they compare it to the GDP of the other. In the most recent year, the GDP of Russia was $1.5 trillion. And in the most recent year, the GDP of the United States was $21 trillion. So understand this is a biblical David versus Goliath. The Russians are not an economic competitor to the United States and never were, nor was any other country until the last few years, when for the first time the United States has a real economic competitor, namely the People's Republic of China. By the way, the GDP of China is about $15 trillion, way more than Russia, but still considerably less than the United States. And even though American businessmen and women love to make speeches about the salutary effects of competition, it is in fact the last thing they want to see or feel in any area. And above all, by a society that refers to itself as socialist and a political authority that refers to itself as a communist party. So all that stuff about the healthiness of competition flies right out the window, and everything imaginable is done to squash it, to repress it, to slow it down. The headlines these days are full of that. But now let me get to the last 3 or 4 years, and then you'll see the context for answering your question about the banks. We had an economic crash in the year 2020. It was the third crash of capitalism in the 21st century. The dot-com crash of early 20, the subprime mortgage crash of 28 and 29, and now the so-called COVID crisis of 2020. We like to give names to our crashes that are particular and different for each one, in the hopes that it will obscure the reality that capitalism is a fundamentally unstable economic system. When I explain this to the students in my classes, I usually allow for a pregnant pause, and I lean across the podium and I look at my students and I say, if any of you lived with a roommate as unstable as capitalism, you would have moved out long ago. And they all laugh because somewhere they kind of get it, even if they're resisting. So anyway, we had a terrible crash in 2020, much more terrible than most people understand. Over half the workers in the United States lost their job. Unemployment peaked in 1933 in the Great Depression at 25%, but over 50% lost their jobs in 2020. Now, some for only a few weeks, some for years, but the point is, it was catastrophic. And it shook the American working class like nothing has in a long time. When you're unemployed, we have endless data about this. If you have any savings, you use them up. Whatever stresses affect your life, they get worse if one of the adults in the room is unemployed. marriages fall apart, spouse abuse goes up the roof, alcoholism goes up the roof, you name it, every social, physical, mental health, everything is hurt by having suddenly been deprived of your job, your daily activity, your network of workplace friends and associates, the security, all of that gives you. You then have the anxiety. When do I get my job back? Will I get my job back? At what salary? Blah, 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 blah. So we put the American working class through that. At the same time, this country experienced the worst public health disaster and failure to cope in our history, with over 1.1 million people dead. And before those things were even memories, we have had a terrible inflation. And before that was under control, because it isn't as I speak to you, we've begun to raise interest rates, which, I mean, it's really as though, if you pardon the imagery, you had taken some person and beat them over the head with a stick, then hit them over the head with, I don't know, a rock, then spit at them, and then, inundated them with smelly water. I mean, it's almost impossible to get and now the banks collapse. That's the point. Yeah, by themselves, none of these things is a catastrophe. But that's not the way to ask. The way to ask is to say, how much trauma, because that's what we're talking about, how much trauma to how many people in how many situations before things begin to explode? And my answer would be that the banks falling apart, we're only at the early phase of that. That I'm confident of. Will there be more banks that fail? Absolutely. Which ones? Nobody knows. How soon? Nobody knows that either. There are already half a dozen that are teetering on the edge. The most famous right now in the United States is the First Republic Bank, which is one of the larger banks in this country. Even the two that collapsed, people refer to them as small banks. Well, that's not quite accurate. They were the 15th and 16th largest banks in the country. 15 and 16 is not a number way down at the bottom. That's a number kind of scarily close to the top. And being a failed bank in Silicon Valley, the Silicon Valley Bank, is no minor matter, because one of the few bright spots of the American economy in this period of its difficulty is what we call high tech. It's the peninsula from San Jose to San Francisco. For the bank there to fall apart suggests weaknesses not just scattered across a country, but concentrated in the last place you want to hamper or undermine economic growth, risk-taking, and so forth, because it is one of the few areas that we have. So if you put all of this together, as I think you need to, then you're talking about an economy that is in very, very bad shape, in not a position to have yet another catastrophe. Remember the crash and the pandemic led to pumping the economy full of money in the hopes of preventing that from crashing. Then that solution produced the new problem of the inflation. Then, to try to cope with the inflation, you jacked up interest rates. That collapsed the banks. You're beginning to see here a pattern. Too many problems crowding in on an economy in too concentrated a period of time. And then you get something that people can confront in their personal lives. If you have anyone in your personal life who's very old and has, as often happens, several illnesses, various parts of the body are not working quite the way they once did, and you get to that point where the doctor comes to you and says, look, we can give him or her this medication, but it clashes with the other medication that their other and you realize you're coming to the end I mean, it may not be for a few years. You hope, you cross your fingers, all the rest. That's where we are with this economy. We are in very, very, very tough shape. And then when you remember that we now have a global competitor who is determined to find their place in the sun, and who have built a network of alliances that Americans have not understood, have not been able to appreciate, have tried and failed to undermine. I mean, just to give you one idea, the United States idea that in a war between NATO and Russia, that somehow this would be a slam dunk, that the Russians would collapse, that the Russians, economy would fit, the sanctions, what was it, the mother of all sanctions, and all of that language. None of that has happened. The Russian economy is in better shape than half the economies of Europe. Just to give you an idea, the average inflation rate in Western Europe is about 10%. The inflation rate in Russia is 11%. The inflation rate in Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania is between 23 and 25%. In the Netherlands, it's 17%. This is a perfectly good gauge. Russia is doing perfectly well while fighting a war with pretty much all of the rest of Europe. Even countries like Finland and Sweden are trying to get into the NATO game. They're rushing to join a club that's in the process of disintegration, and all the hoopla and celebration is not going to save them from an underlying reality in which the wind is blowing exactly the other way. That's the truth of it. And so the banking crisis, which again is not just two little banks on either coast. Credit Suisse in Switzerland collapsed. That's a global mega bank. It collapsed. The collapse there was so severe, was worse than here, that literally over one weekend, the Swiss National Bank, the equivalent of the Federal Reserve in Switzerland, did one of those shotgun marriages, forcing the Union Bank of Switzerland, UBS, to absorb Credit Suisse. That's like you had come in and forced, to use the metaphor, Citibank and Chase Manhattan to become one. I mean, it's really extraordinary that you had to go to such lengths in such a short amount of time. And the reverberations, they have just begun. I could take the next hour, I won't, don't worry, but I could take the next hour and go through a list of the other weaknesses of the American economy. They are all going to play out. And all that's covering them, if you allow me, is a very thick layer of bullshit. Bullshit from Biden, bullshit from the Republicans. They both need, for different reasons, to pretend that none of this is all that serious. The Democrats, because they need to pretend they've got everything under control, and the Republicans, who can only pick for criticism those things that won't offend their donors. And since their donors are the bulk of the capitalist class, they don't have much freedom either. That's why we spend all the time really getting excited in this country over whether trans people can visit the same toilets that the rest of us can. These are pure distractions, because even our population understands that below the so-called culture wars is a much more profound problem that nobody knows how to address.
Yes, absolutely. The distractions are many and absurd. And
Yes.
I did want to ask, because you'd mentioned China and this issue of having another power battling with our hegemony. And I saw recently, it was on Twitter. I wasn't watching Fox News, everyone, don't worry. Fox News, if you can believe it, recently did a segment, of course it was skewed, but on how Russia and potentially Saudi Arabia are turning to the yuan for international payments rather than the dollar. And that, of course, as you've already pointed out, represents a massive shift in the US reserve currency status. So what does that mean? I mean, you've outlined many of the things that are wrong with our economy, but what does this one specifically mean for the US economy?
Well, here what you have, I'm really glad you asked. Here what you have is a related but separate issue. The United States as an economy is in difficulty, and part of the causes of that and part of the effects of that are that, and there's no nice way to say this, so I'm going to be blunt. The American empire has peaked. It's on the way down. And Americans, I know this is difficult. Look, the British are an example. There's still a significant number of British people who haven't figured out that the British Empire isn't there anymore. If you watch the funeral of the last queen a few weeks ago, the pomp and the circumstance was a financial burden on a poor economy, not the celebration of the self-delusional quality. Make it kind of, your heart goes out because you kind of know people must be needing desperately to believe that, well, America hopefully will learn that the ride up the last century is a lot more pleasant than the ride down of an empire. Here's the way I think to understand it. We have had, since World War II, the war in Korea, the war in Vietnam, the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, and the United States has lost every single one of them. I know it's hard. I know Americans don't want to think like that, but that's the reality. They can't do it. They are not winning in Ukraine either. It's fantasy, it's hope, but it isn't the reality. And that's what's happening. Surge after surge didn't amount to anything. Victory after victory, the drones, all of this self-delusional stuff. One of the foundations of the American empire were the fact that whereas before world trade had mostly used the British pound, if a ship went from Africa to Japan, the insurance for that was written in London. The contracts for servicing the ships or providing them with the necessary fuel, all that was done in London. It was done in British pounds. The United States replaced the British Empire, literally, and the dollar became the great global currency. The reason that's wonderfully important is, and it can be explained this way, where does the rest of the world get dollars from? And because they have to hold them, banks hold them as a reserve to show that their currency is something you can accept, a Swedish kroner or a Dutch, any currency, because the bank of that country holds dollars as the reserve. And you're willing to take their currency because you could cash it in for dollars if you were so disposed. So the dollar is accumulated in those banks. The dollar is accumulated in the accounts of businesses that have to transact globally in dollars. The petroleum producers of the world have for decades billed everybody for selling them oil in dollars. So if Saudi Arabia sells oil to Sweden, the bill is paid in dollars. The Swedish company draws on a dollar account somewhere and sends a check or a wire to Saudi Arabia. Well, ask yourself, how do they get the dollar? Answer, they ship goods and services to the United States, things that their working people have produced, Japanese electronics, French wine, Finnish telephones, whatever, and they get in return little cheap green pieces of paper that cost absolutely nothing to produce. So think about it in the simplest terms. Fast production around the world in countries that are poorer than the United States, enriching the already rich United States, and in exchange, we give them a piece of paper, a cheap green little piece of paper. They can either hold that, and they do much of that, end of story, it just sits there in their vaults, or, and you'll love this now, they lend it to the United States government. They use their dollars to loan to what are called treasury bonds. They lend it to the treasury so that part of the cost of the American government, we don't have to tax our own people or our own businesses, because the kind folks in the rest of the world have produced goods and services, shipped them to the United States, gotten the payment in dollars, and lent those dollars to the United States. I mean, if you understand, then you'll know why every other country in the world, not just China, every other country would love to be in a comparable position. So the minute the dollar became the global currency, it became the target for at least everybody else's fantasies. Gee, could we get such a status for the euro or for the Japanese yen? Well, they were not strong enough to do that, but the Chinese are. And they are now the second powerful economy. In some ways, they have matched everything the United States can do, including the high-tech stuff. That's why we are in the process of trying to expel TikTok from the United States. That's why we go after the Huawei Corporation, imprisoning the daughter of the CEO of that, childish stuff that isn't going to make a hill of beans difference. It's just symbolically, if you can't defeat them, well, then have a public theater, like a Punch and Judy show where the puppets go at it, and you're supposed to believe that the children don't understand that these are puppets and there's not really what's going on. So what you saw with Saudi Arabia, and you cannot exaggerate the importance of that, Saudi Arabia having the foreign minister of China hosting the Iranian foreign minister and the Saudi foreign minister, announcing that the Sunni and Shiite portions of Islam are going to stop killing each other, send embassies to each other's countries, try to live in peace. I mean, look at the symbol. China is the peacemaker of the Middle East, which the United States has been unable to do, assuming it was really trying, for decades. I mean, it really is a passing of the baton. It's a sign, and that they're going to trade in yuan, which is already happening. I don't know if you're aware, but Russia has agreed to accept payment for its oil from China in yuan. I believe it is accepting the Indian currency from India because it's shipping a lot of oil and gas to them. And you're beginning to see the outlines of the emerging alternative to the American empire, which has these initials that people better learn: BRICS, BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, with about a dozen other countries that have either already applied for membership in BRICS or have announced that they intend to. You put that together with the Belt and Road Initiative, the investment program from China to Europe, and you're beginning to see the outlines of what's coming. And believe me, the Americans see it too. The problem is in the American mentality, and maybe this is the history of the human race, sad as that might be, that if you've been in the empire for a while, you just can't wrap your head around what it might mean to come to some terms with the end. Every empire has come to an end. It wasn't reasonable to imagine that the United States would last forever. It's kind of childish. Britain, there's a historical note that you might find interesting. When the United States broke away from Britain, the British went to war to stop it. The war of the Independence War, 1776, that celebrated in the United States, blah, blah. They lost. They lost. They went to war again against the United States, 1812. They tried again. They lost again. After the two losses, they realized this is not working. We're not going to. And they reached a peace agreement. And the rest of the century, the 19th century, the United States just surpassed Britain. By World War I, it was over. The United States was powerful and Britain wasn't. And, I don't know if the same story is going to unfold with China, but the flirting with putting the Seventh Fleet of the United States Navy in the South China Sea, the British now sending expended nuclear shells to the Ukraine, Putin's response, putting the tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus, which is matching what the United States, these are children playing with very dangerous toys. And then you wonder whether really we could be a species that self-destructs over these things. Frightening. It's really frightening. The only thing more frightening to me than that is watching our political leaders living in a universe in which everything I've just described seems not to be present in their minds. I don't recall. I've been frustrated with American political leaders pretty much all my life, but this level of disconnect I find really odd.
Yeah, it is. It is absolutely terrifying. Remember when George Bush was the dumb, embarrassing president? Remember that?
He looks like a genius in
I know.
comparison to what we. Yes.
Um,
But remember, he too. What did he get on that? He got on that American military
mission accomplished.
in his with his army outfit. A mission accomplished, and then we went on to lose the war. I mean, it was just ouch,
That's a metaphor for the United States, right?
Yes.
So with that, I know that we're coming to the end of the interview here, but I want to ask, not because I think that there is necessarily a silver lining, as you said, the way down in the empire is bumpier than the way up.
Yep.
But I do keep seeing, Starbucks workers going on strike, Amazon workers going on strike, teachers going on strike. I wish the rail workers had gone on strike, but there's still discussions about that. There seems to be, since the decimation of the unions and the decimation of socialist organizations and these leftist workers associations, there seems to be a revitalization of that happening right now. Do you feel that that's true? And if so, do you feel that there is a silver lining there that could not save the U.S. economy, but work to support people as we continue through this very difficult time?
Yes. The short answer to your question is, I am amazed at the level of militancy that has arisen here in the United States. I think it portends really good possibilities. I'm optimistic about those. I don't think those are going to go away. Whether it's the retail workers or the fast food workers or the others that have taken the lead. I'm noticing how important women are in this process, immigrants are in this process, young people are in this process. Those are all crucial components of a more successful labor upsurge than we had last time. I'm a little sad that the official AFL-CIO remains so docile and so passive, but there are signs even there. The latest election in the United Auto Workers has brought an interesting new energy there. The woman whose name escapes me right now, but who's the leader of the flight attendants union, she's a remarkable breath of fresh air. She could be a real catalyst leader for all of this. And I know I've had her on my show. I've talked with her. She has the capacity, very sharp, thinks very carefully, understands. But I think I'm most excited about what has not yet arrived on the shores of the United States, but is very profound. And I'm talking about France, Germany, and Greece. And Americans particularly have to understand the French are stunning. Millions of people, now the 9th time in a row, have kept it up. They've gone from saying to the government, you are not going to solve your financial problems by depriving us of 2 years of our pensions. It's outrageous for you to have thought of it. It's twice as outrageous for you to have done it. It's 10 times outrageous to have not even put it to a parliamentary vote so you could get, not that that would make a difference, but you couldn't even dare that because Mr. Macron's own party won't support him on this thing. And they're in the street and they're showing that the French Revolution from 1789 right through the Yellow Vests from before the pandemic are alive and well. French democracy is really rearing its head. And in the last few days, this movement, which was led by the unified agreement of all 8 of the union federations in France, they don't just have 1 or 2, they have 8 who can't agree usually on anything. They've all agreed to do this. They do it in a disciplined way. Other social movements are falling in right behind them. And most recently, in the last 4 days, the college teachers, high school students, and the college students, en masse, so horrified are they, they're light years away from a pension, right? They're young people by and large, but they see the government coming down. They know that they're next. They know that they will be affected if their elderly parents don't have a pension for 2 years. That's going to affect the family finances, whether they can afford to go to get an education, et cetera, et cetera. So you're beginning to understand that this is a crisis, and it's a crisis for the French government. Mr. Macron, this was a 0 when he was elected, but he's become a minus at this point. Even the rest of the French bourgeoisie is looking at him. My God, are you bad at your job? But that's not all. Then there's the Germans. The Germans, starting a couple days ago, shut down the entire transport system. The airplanes, the trains, nothing moves. They didn't even have a railroad disaster like we did here in East Palestine, Ohio. They didn't, but they are determined that the inflation, which is killing them because of their energy prices, part of the Russia-NATO sanction game, they're not allowing themselves to be the victims. That you're going to squeeze the working class of Germany in order to free the resources to go fight Russia in the Ukraine. The image, my family is French and German. I'm an American, but my folks came here from there. The image of German tanks rolling eastward, killing Russians. If you wanted to mobilize the Russian people behind their leader, nothing would get even close to doing that than what you just... The stupidity of this, it tells you that there's something really wrong over here. They're not thinking right. What you just did will not be offset by 25 tanks, and this is childishly dumb what you are doing. And then the last one, Greece. The same time we had a railway disaster, which was bad, they had a railway disaster, which was much worse. It killed almost 60 people, most of them young students, either going to their school holiday or coming back from it. I don't remember. And the people of Greece went into a kind of mourning and a kind of anger. Their conservative government had recently privatized the railroads. The private railroad companies weren't maintaining the safety, just like in the United States. But unlike here, where Republicans blame Democrats and everybody goes through the obligatory felt condolences to the ruined families that live in the toxic cloud. There, the people of Greece went in the hundreds of thousands into the streets, confronting the government. We're not going to. And you can see in Germany, in Greece, in France, the same issues as here. The Republican Party is about to submit bills in Congress to reduce Social Security. It's exactly the same as Macron. And my feeling is it's going to come here, one or another form. It always comes to the United States later and slower and more moderate. But with all of that, it's coming. We're not that different from the Greeks or the French or the Germans. And I think it's coming here. And I think what you're seeing, Starbucks, the horrific behavior of that faker, Mr. Schultz, who sits at the top, or the new one that they keep rotating the musical chairs of their leaders. They're trying to stop Amazon, really harshly trying to stop that union. That's going to cause all kinds of anger and upset. And the rest of the population is getting pissed off. Look, if I had time, I would talk I think the shootings in this country, the spectacular explosions of people killing one another, the crazy politics, the belief of Republicans that Democrats are agents of the devil and vice versa. These are signs of the psychological disintegration here as well. Is very, very serious. And the loneliness, my wife and daughter are both psychotherapists. So I get a constant report from each of them about what the clients coming to see them. And they don't deal with people that are seriously upset. They deal with people who have some problems and want someone to help them work them through. So that they're like most of us. The only difference being some of us have whatever it takes to go see a therapist. And they're confirming that people are just on the edge, wondering what's going to happen if they go over that edge. And I think what you're seeing in France and Germany and Greece are people who have gone over the edge. And the real difference is in those countries, collective action to solve a social problem is in people's minds. Whereas in the United States, we're still stuck in the individualism. We really imagine that each of us in our own way can slither out, escape the social problem, work around it, solve it. And when that breaks down, there's a moment of intense loneliness, but it's often coupled with a kind of eureka moment where working together with other people becomes the other solution you hadn't thought about. It's happening to the workers at Starbucks, at Amazon, at Trader Joe, at fill in the blank. And I think it's coming to the American people. The Great Depression, we had an upsurge of an American working class sharply going to the left. There's no reason to believe that cannot and will not happen again.
Well, I certainly hope that is the case. And interestingly enough, we're pairing this interview with you with an interview with an activist from France. So very apt that you would bring that up.
Okay, good.
Professor Wolff, thank you so much for taking the time. Again, folks can learn more and listen to all of Professor Wolff's work over at www.democracyatwork.info. Again, Professor, thank you so much for taking the time.
And thank you, Eleanor, for having a program where you do this sort of thing. It's probably more important than at any point in American history. So please keep doing it.
We will.